You're listening to Criticaleye's Asia Leadership Podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Welcome to the Criticaleye Asia podcast, Inspiring Leaders to Succeed. I'm Michael Crompton, the General Manager for Criticaleye in Asia, and I'm here with Tian Beng Ng, who is the Group CEO of Certis Group. And we're looking today, as I said, at the leading business transformation through innovation. Tian, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me here.
Pleasure. I'd like to start really with looking at sort of your maybe some previous experience leading large organizations across the APAC region. How would you view the role of technology in driving meaningful transformation?
Yeah, well, Michael, we really see that, my view is that technology, is really critical. It's no longer optional. And, in fact, it should not be viewed, as a enabler, but is really sort of a backbone of modern operations. For our company, Certis, I think transformation really comes from combining 3 things for us. One is sort of a strong operational, design. Number 2 is obviously encompassing AI and data. And we're doing a lot around automation and robotics, which I can talk about in a while. And then finally, sort of putting everything in with our orchestration platform, which is called Mozart. So for us, it's really, technology is really sort of a very core function of this, yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that as the core to the business. What opportunities are there for the technology to really create a meaningful impact? So looking, I guess, from the operational side as well as strategically.
Yeah, the really significant opportunities, I think, for technology. For us, in Certis, we have a really huge sort of a workforce, especially in the frontline, operations, right? For example, here in Singapore, we have almost close to 20,000 people. And for us, we have a big challenge of finding people, wanting to do a lot of these jobs that we have. So for us, we are pivoting aggressively to, technology to actually elevate, a lot of these, challenges. So 2 specific technologies we're looking at is really using AI to really, optimize our manpower resourcing, for example, and using robotics that can really take away a lot of these repetitive, kind of tasks that, humans currently do. But, with the significant advantages that we're seeing now with AI and with robotics, we're really excited that, we see a future where robots can actually take away, some of these roles, that we have that humans are currently doing.
And looking at that sort of AI in particular, I guess, is how do you find that the ways to have an impact on the business then, and in terms of, I guess, accelerating growth and also looking at innovative ways of creating new growth areas?
Yeah, I mean, we see AI really underpinning, I think, a lot of our transformation, efforts. Michael, I was mentioning, I was speaking a lot of, I guess, on my front end side, but obviously in the back end too, right? In terms of back end productivity, which obviously we've been hearing a lot in the media recently about companies, leveraging AI, even for the back office operations. And yes, we also see huge opportunities that we're working, currently across that area.
Okay. Well, so you mentioned obviously a fairly significant workforce, sort of manpower within Singapore. How do you navigate then maybe that tension between pursuing innovation, but also maintaining stability within the business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, I was just debating this very same topic with my leadership team. And, our strategy is really what we call a dual speed, approach. Number 1 is that we obviously need to keep our mission critical operations stable. For example, here in Certis, we do a lot of operations that are really critical. Like, for example, at the airport, We have almost 4 to 5,000 people. They're managing a lot of operations at the airport here, in Singapore. So we do what we call a dual speed. And what I mean is that we'll sort of create sandboxes for sort of new, areas that we want to innovate and we want to incubate, right? So, for example, we were talking just now about robotics and AI. There'll be good examples of what we call sandboxing and ring fencing. And for example, we set up 2 business units recently, one on robotics and one on AI, right? And we're ring fencing them. We're obviously investing in it. We're putting people in it, but we're sort of keeping it distinct from our sort of day-to-day critical operations that we run. And, obviously, once we've done the testing, the proof of concept, and we're confident, then we'll sort of roll it out into our operations.
Right. So you're giving yourself the opportunity to sort of learn and experiment internally and then looking where that can be rolled out across the business.
Very much so, yeah.
So looking at your leadership teams then and leading teams through this sort of period of change and transformation, how do you approach the sort of alignment and engagement across the leadership teams as these initiatives are rolled out in the business?
Yeah, well, I'm a really firm believer that we need to start by explaining why are we doing this, right? Why are we transforming? What success look like? And frankly, what happens if we are not doing it? So I think it really starts, first of all, with strong sort of narrative of explaining why we're doing it. Then number 2, I think a lot of, aligning and engagement is done through communication. So I think communication is really, really critical. I do that a lot through sort of regular leadership offsites, through town halls, through sort of small group meetings where I visit our frontline, operations. Number 3 is around, everyone owning a part of the transformation, as in every leader. So look, this is not a transformation that I lead myself, right? And by no means I'll be able to do that. So really critical that every sort of senior leader of my leadership team is owning a part of that. And then finally, I would say setting up a dedicated transformation team. I think that's really important.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be a huge team, but there needs to be dedicated team members that sort of live and breathe, right? What we're driving in terms of the transformation initiatives. Because I think what I found in sort of my previous roles is that, we end up having sort of team members that are doing multiple roles and sort of running a day job and night job. And, effectively, they're not really focused on driving transformation. So I think that's sort of the last point of like creating a dedicated transformation team. And that would really help in driving alignment and engaging the leadership teams. Yeah.
That absolutely makes sense. I do wonder sometimes when, if transformation projects are so crucial to a business success, when some companies will just say, this is in addition to your day job, we want you to drive the transformation as well, and wonder why things don't necessarily work out as well as they'd hope. So I think that's a really crucial part of your strategy there. So you've got alignment and engagement, hopefully, across your teams. I'm sure that's in place. What about external partners, for example, during transformation initiatives? That can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. Even you're all working to the same plan, but that alignment and engagement can sometimes be a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think, aligning, externally is really important, especially with, in the tech world, right? That we are, aggressively pivoting into the ecosystem partners is really important because honestly, we can't sort of build everything. In fact, our strategy is really threefold, right? In sort of the tech world is to sort of build, buy, and partner. Okay. And, on the buying and partnering side of it, it's really critical that we get alignment with our ecosystem partners. So with our selected partners, we do share our strategy. We get alignment, we sign, MOUs or even form up JVs, right? To ensure that we get strong ownership to drive our strategy and plans. We obviously do have KPIs and dashboards that we set up. So to ensure that we are sort of, regularly tracking in the right direction, with our sort of external partners, right? But I do want to make a quick point, Michael, about the alignment. I think in my role as sort of the group CEO, sort of important stakeholders too are the chairman and the board. It's really critical. And that's actually something that I spend a lot of my time on too. We are private and 100% owned by, Temasek. I do spend time, obviously, ensuring the shareholder, right, is also aligned. And I think, that's a critical part of getting strategic alignment, right?
Absolutely. I think, communicating upwards and keeping everyone informed rather than when problems appear or when you're asked the question is an integral part of the process. So I'm glad to hear that such a key part of your strategies as well. What about, with the best will in the world with these programs and transformation projects, it can sometimes take longer than maybe planned. And how do you keep that focus and momentum when maybe sometimes results might take a bit of time to show through?
Well, number one, we do celebrate sort of small wins or micro wins, and not just sort of the large, milestones, right? Which, as you just mentioned correctly, it does take time. I think that's number one. Number two is that we do want to, share, data transparently internally, really to show progress, with our team. So we do that in our regular sort of town halls and newsletters. And then finally, we want to sort of keep the team aligned on the longer term purpose, right? As I mentioned, explaining, at the start why we're doing this is really important, right? So, really important to keep reminding them of why we're doing this and the long term purpose. And for us at Certis, for example, I can share that our purpose is to really make the world safer, smarter, and better. So, in all our sort of transformation initiatives, we're sort of pivoting back and reminding our team members that, hey, these efforts they're doing are important because it is very meaningful, right? That we want to make the world safer, better, and smarter.
What I'm hearing from a lot of your answers, TB, is that your approach is transparency, communication, and bringing everyone sort of into the business, the program, the projects. Is this sort of come to you through any early lessons where they may have shaped your approach to maybe guiding teams through this uncertainty? And I think, people don't mind if there's bad news or hopefully good news, but ambiguity is the challenge, isn't it? Where people don't just know what's happening. So that transparency, I think, is really integral to driving through successful projects. How have you learned that? Anything that you can share with us from earlier on in your career that might have shaped your approach to this strategy of yours?
Yeah, very much so, Michael. I think what I've learned, honestly, is that culture has a significant impact on how we sort of, manage teams, through uncertainty. And, I know a lot of times I think, companies probably pivot a lot to just the action and the actual innovation and transformation that companies need to do. But, I think culture is actually really, really critical. And, it really has to, in my sort of view, culture has to sort of embody sort of three main things, right? Number one is trust. It's going to be really important, especially, when we're managing through uncertainty. Collaboration is important because, we need to ensure, right, the different groups within the companies are collaborating and working well together. And then finally, open to sort of innovation, right, is really important. So we can sort of embed these three things in the company's culture. I think, companies will definitely do well in sort of guiding teams through these, turbulent times that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, and sticking to that purpose, I think, is absolutely crucial. And I know you and I have discussed previously the importance of culture, and I totally agree. Looking at your own sort of leadership journey and your growth as a CEO, as you're looking to navigate transformation, how do you look back and reflect on your own growth and maybe potentially adapting your leadership style?
Yeah, I think number one, honestly, still work in progress. I'm working really hard on it. It's sort of moving from a leader as a decision maker to more of a leader as an orchestrator, right? And I think that's really important when, you come into a senior leadership role and you have, obviously a big workforce and you have many senior leaders, right? You can't honestly be deciding on every, decision. So you really have to see yourself as and I see myself as a leader, as a, orchestrator as point one. Point two is that I think I mentioned it. And honestly, in my role as the CEO, I think my biggest value is on culture, which we just spoke about, strategy, and transformation. I think these are the three things that I can sort of bring the biggest value because it impacts across the company, right? Now, obviously, I'm not saying that operations, is not critical. In fact, that's something that I do spend time on too. But I do have other leaders that are focusing on that. And I think these three things that I spoke about earlier are things that I can add the biggest, value, which I'm, prioritizing my time on.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. What are you doing sort of help yourself to learn from previous experiences and others' experiences, maybe peer groups, broader trends outside of your sector and industry. Can you share a bit about sort of any practices or things that you do to help get that outside-in viewpoint?
Yeah, well, I mean, ensuring that I'm constantly in touch with the customers, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Because obviously they are the lifeline of the company in terms of business, right? Or, revenue coming in. So spending time to make sure that I'm there with the customers, hearing from them, spending time with our frontline operations, like, through site visits, ensuring that I'm hearing sort of the challenges and the opportunities from our own frontline team. The other big area, obviously, is peer forum. So Criticaleye, I think, has been very, invaluable to me in staying ahead and keeping in touch. And I know, Michael, you've been very helpful with set up like pop-up boards, right? Where we get to hear from different Criticaleye sort of mentors on specific areas.
Yep.
Has been really helpful. And I think the final area on staying in touch is really spending time on sort of industry associations, right? So,
Yes.
I've been very active in the past in different type of industry associations where I can network and sort of engage with industry peers and partners. So I think that's has been really helpful too.
Great stuff. Thank you. I guess you also have the benefit and the opportunity of being part of your major shareholder, your 100% shareholder, and the portfolio companies there and within Singapore and globally, having access to that sort of a fairly broad group of companies and peers there. So hopefully that sort of adds to your...
Yes. I mean, that has been extremely helpful, especially, as we sort of pivot over to tech aggressively. I mean, they've been very helpful to sort of introduce different companies that they have been, working with too.
Great stuff. Can you give us a crystal ball forecast or any emerging trends or capabilities that you think will be most critical for leaders in tech-driven businesses as we go forward?
Yeah, a couple of key areas. I think number one is obviously cybersecurity is going to be key. With the current threat environment, I think we've spoken at it at many forums, right? But I think that's going to be really important for all leaders to really pay close attention to. I think AI, we've spoken about it too. I think a lot of focus and discussions has been really on sort of more the digital realm or the office productivity side. But I think it'll be twofold, right? I think number one, it will be the office productivity side, that AI is a huge part. But as I mentioned, I think even on the front end, or the blue collar worker side, I think with the advancement of AI and robotics, I think that's super exciting. So, if any leader, you're in a company that has many sort of more frontline operations, blue collar type workers, keep an eye out, I think, on AI and robotics, because that's really coming fast and furious too. And then finally, I think, trend in, I guess, the topic we've been discussing, right? Like having leaders be able to successfully navigate uncertainty and be able to innovate quickly, right? Would be sort of the last area I just mentioned, yeah.
Absolutely. I think those the leadership skills and the ability to resilience is a word that's coming up quite a lot as well with the pace of change that's coming on. So able to navigate the changes that are happening constantly. I was very fortunate to visit your offices a while back and see some of your robots that have been created. I'm just absolutely amazed at the abilities and the sort of technology that's going into those. So I'm keeping a keen eye on robotics as well since then. So thanks for that visit going back a few months ago. I'd like to sort of wrap up the conversation, TB, and ask if you have any advice to CEOs and senior executives who are looking to harness technology, engage their teams, and particularly drive successful transformation.
Thanks, Michael. I think three main things, that I would mention here. I think number one is invest in your people, culture, as I spoke about, skills, leadership alignment. I think the people is really, really critical. I think, no matter what sort of fantastic plans or strategy we have, we obviously are not able to execute, right? So I would start with people. Number two is focus on partnerships. I think no company, again, can transform alone. We all need to work with different partners, right? At different sort of phases of the transformation. So partnerships are really important. And then point number three is just moving fast, but we have to scale responsibility, right? In a very responsible way. So, that means ensuring that we're sort of creating safe spaces to test, and then we only scale, what sort of works, right? So, yeah, I think these three areas, Michael.
Great stuff. Look, I really appreciate your time and your input, TB. And look forward to keeping a very keen eye on Certis Group and your transformation journey. And thanks again for joining us, and look forward to speaking to you in the near future.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for the
Thanks very much.
opportunity.
Thank you.